So tonight is somewhat of a transitional session. What I mean by that is the next time we're scheduled to meet is in August, and we're going to be talking. The rabbi and I were talking about it, and we're gonna the classes that we do in Elul in preparation for Rosh Hashanah will be focused on that concept of tshuva, and so we're going to focus for that on tshuva and repentance and action, human action as it relates to Messianism. So that will be next month, and we haven't scheduled September. I'm going to assume that there are not available Wednesdays in September, though I have not studied the calendar in great detail. And then, so it may be a little while before we look at Messianism from the year, let's say, 1400 onwards. So what we're going to do tonight, excuse me, we're going to look at the Rambam. We did some of the Rambam last time. We're gonna review the Rambam, talk about his writings in a different location, and then also look at the Ramban, Nachmanides, and apocalyptic messianism, just to lay the groundwork for where this is in Jewish thought at the time. So I'm gonna do a lot of screen sharing. Here we go. So what we have here is what we looked at last time. So last time we talked about how the Rambam, he put in the Mishnah Torah, in his halachic code, he put 2 chapters at the end of Hilchot Melachim Umilchamot, the laws of kings and wars. He put the last 2 chapters of that is about Mashiach, the laws of Mashiach, which means he thinks that it can fit into some kind of a halachic system, but also that it is the ultimate outgrowth of the notion of kings and wars, right? Because or else he wouldn't have put it there. He could have put it wherever he wanted to. And I was actually, I said this last time, but I was a bit struck in a good way by how strong of a reaction some of us had to the various things that the Rambam said. Because, and the reason I said I was surprised is because when you study Messianism as a whole, you quickly learn that the Rambam represents the most conservative view of what Messianism is. And by that, I mean what we talked about last time of how what the Rambam's conception of Messianism and the Messianic day is a restoration of the Davidic dynasty, an ingathering of all of the Jewish exiles to Jerusalem, and essentially undisturbed time to commune with Torah and commune with God. That was really essentially his vision. I'll just scroll through, excuse me, just to refresh that he did develop a strong messianic thought, which is, sort of not necessarily new, but not original to the text necessarily, but at the same time, doesn't go so far as other messianists. For example, we saw in the beginning of chapter 3, John assumed that the Messiah is going to have miracles and wonders and all that stuff. That's not going to be true. He's not going to do miracles. And he's also only going to be Mashiach if he actually carries through with his word and can actually bring people closer to God. And that's why Christianity, as he says, is such a stumbling block, because it actually distanced people from God, right? And so it's this lofty idea, but still one that is rooted in the Davidic dynasty, and as it says here in the beginning, the sovereignty. Now, we then looked, that was the 11th chapter, his first of 2 chapters, and then we looked at the second chapter, which, okay, here we go, in which he articulates sort of the don'ts, right? And the don't was, don't think that Isaiah, that the wolf will lie with the lamb, that's not literal, right? That's just metaphoric. But it's not actually, that's not what the world is going to look like. Because, as he says in 2, our sages taught that the only difference between now and the Messianic era is going to be that the Jews will no longer be subject to Gentile kingdoms, and that the Mashiach is not going to uproot the nature of the world. It's just going to be basically that Jews are happy in the land of Israel. He takes 2 chapters to say that, but I think that's really essentially his thesis. So what we see here is someone whose vision of the world is utopian Jewishly. That, I mean, unless you think that being with a room full of Jews is not utopian, but you know what I mean. Is utopia. Everyone's together, learning Torah undisturbed, everyone who's been exiled is back together again, but whatever happens to the rest of the world is just not really so interesting to him. And also a very strong emphasis on don't calculate when the Mashiach is coming, right? He says it also. Don't look for someone who's performing miracles and all of these fancy things. Just, kind of evaluate a Mashiach if he comes about, but don't go looking. Any questions or comments before we move to the next part? Please remember that I can't really see many of you because of screen sharing, so just unmute yourselves and talk, please.
Jeff,
Yeah.
I had read that in the Messianic Times, all of the holidays except for Purim would be canceled. Is this part of the tradition?
Yeah, I think that's discussed, I believe, in the Gemara originally. If anyone remembers exactly where, please volunteer that. Yeah, it's interesting that he doesn't really mention that.
I thought that's in Megillah.
Like that idea very much.
What? I thought that's in Megillah. They talk about
Right, and there's the whole thing with Tisha B'Av, right? That's coming up this Sunday. Is Tisha B'Av canceled? Yeah, it's a whole thing.
Passover.
Yeah.
Are they canceled, or is it that it's not needed?
Well, they're no longer observed.
Well,
they're no longer needed, right? They're no longer needed.
Wow.
That's what I
That's
read.
a little different than canceled.
Well.
Yeah.
It's like we won't need food or medicine.
No, that's not part of what I was saying.
I know that, but what I'm saying is, supposedly, if the Messiah comes, and it's the real Messiah, we don't need food anymore. We don't need money.
I don't think that's what Maimonides is not saying. We don't need food. He's saying just the opposite. There are no miracles. Nature still operates as it now operates, right? Isn't that what you said?
No. Yeah, I would think that sounds right. But right, because he says, right, you don't upend nature or any of that. So anyway, we look at Rambam, and how do we think? Does this Messianic era, what's your reaction to it? Does it, are you ready to go packing your bags, excited?
I am.
Awesome. I guess that's what the Kollel is, right? Yeah, Helene, go ahead. You're muted, Helene. Helene, you're muted.
We just don't know when, the Mashiach is coming, and well, it will be whether it'll be in our lifetime, and but it's nice to think about it.
Yeah.
Also, there'd be peace in Israel. Then the Muslims would give us the keys to build a new temple, right?
Yep, that's why the shul once got an email. We get emails on occasion from interesting characters asking for interesting things. And one time we got one. I've started this organization. He basically was saying he's just trying to restore the Temple Mount. And it turns out it was a guy I went to high school with. So he was always strange in high school and clearly pursued that part of himself. So yes, there are definitely people in Israel, who are doing things.
Making preparation.
Yeah, some are more benign. There have been cases of people who are trying to blow up Al-Aqsa on the Temple Mount.
Have done what?
Much more severe, trying to bring this about, trying to blow up the mosque on the Temple Mount. So there's been that's one of the reasons security is so tight there, because these types of things, as we will talk about, these types of things attract folks, who are looking for radical change in the world. Let's say that. Is that diplomatic? Yeah, what?
I was going to say, in terms of the reaction to Rambam, it's almost hard to fully grasp what he's saying, because in our davening, let's say, there's constantly a call for Mechayeh team, or at the end of Shemona Esrei, the rebuilding. So if you believe in that, or minimum, if you're saying the words on a fairly regular basis, how could one not be tempted to wonder, when it's coming, or how soon it's coming, or look for the miracles when that's all that you're supposedly dreaming of?
Yes, it's such a good point. I think that's what the dance the Rambam is trying to do, is say, yes, there is something called the Mashiach, but at the same time, just, don't go poking around for it. But it's very hard, and as we'll see in a minute, when you're actually faced with it in real time, it's a lot more difficult to
Like
deal with.
telling a kid like you hide your Hanukkah gifts a month before, but don't look for them in the house, and then you go look for them.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
It's great.
there, question, and I don't believe in an afterlife, but my understanding is that what I thought was that when the Messiah comes, maybe that's not what we're saying here.
Mhm.
There's something similar to what occurs in Christianity, sort of the rapture of everyone who has been good and shuffled off this mortal coil comes back.
Oh, is
That's
that
not
what
what's
the
going
rapture
on here. Correct.
I mean, I don't know enough about it to say. I think that the idea of the resurrection of the dead is somewhat associated with it.
Because that just throws a whole different light on. So we have a bunch of resurrected dead running around and rebuilding temples and everything's lovely. And I'm just not sure. I'm having a hard time reconciling those concepts in what we're reading right now.
Well, that's why those burial plots in Israel are so expensive, because they're on the mountain that they say is closest to where Mashiach is going to come in from, and so they'll be the first ones to be resurrected. Look, I don't think the Mashiach is not a linear topic. The Rambam is coming into a world that is post-Gemara, and as we said, transitioning out of the Gaonim with Rav Sadia Gaon and all of that. There's a lot of apocalyptic messianism going on there, right? The idea that the Messiah is this radical transformation. It is going to involve a major war of like Gog and Magog and good and evil and all these things, which we'll address. But if you go down the vein solely of apocalyptic messianism, you can get to some really intense places. But as we said, so the Rambam's kind of, I would say he's countercultural in that sense, in that he's trying to take this topic that has gone all over the place and rein it in, make it something that accords with his sense of the world, which is, as we said, rational, scientific, and scientific in the 1,000-year-old sense, and develop it into an idea he clearly thinks is important, but he does not agree with the prevailing beliefs about it. So it's not a linear study, because I think part of it is one of the undercurrents that we've been talking about, is that it is very appealing to the human psyche. And so, yeah, that's really the lens through which I want to examine it. David, did you have a question?
I had a comment with
Mhm.
respect to the quote unquote rebuilding of the third temple. I think that there are many that don't necessarily see that we are going to be rebuilding the third temple as opposed to the third temple coming down to us. Also, that within Israel, some of the I'll say more benign actors that are preparing themselves for the third temple are those folks that are Kohanim, that are specifically preparing themselves to perform the various Kohanimic rites that were performed within the temple, including sacrifices and the like. Obviously, they're just ready for when the temple appears, as opposed to going and creating a space and then building the temple there.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction. Yes, being ready versus making it happen. Yeah. Okay, so the Rambam, he talks about messianism here, and then also in one of his epistles, right, his major letters. This is called the Epistle to Yemen, which he wrote in the year 1172. I'm just looking in one of my books just for reference, because it came together at a whole convergence of many factors, and I want to make sure I don't leave any out. So, a leader of a community of Yemenite Jews named Rabbi Jacob ben Netanel writes a letter to the Rambam, and he says, all of these, my community is in a terrible place, and here are all the terrible things that are happening. Now in Yemen, they were experiencing a major surge in Islam, right? Islam's already been around, but the sort of, I guess you could say, Islamist powers are rising and also at the same time becoming less tolerant of Jews. So, until now, Jews have kind of been able to do their own thing, and we say, oh, great, look how much we have in common with the Muslims, and we kind of leave each other alone. But the Muslim presence is growing and really coming to dominate and seeing itself as something that should be the present, and that Jews should just go along and convert or go away or what have you. But that sense of tolerance is waning. And so that, first of all, is very overwhelming and scary for that community. There are also some other kind of wonky things going around for them at the same time. There's also, there's a Jew in this community who converts to Islam and then walks around and saying how basically Islam is the ultimate fulfillment of the biblical historical destiny, and everyone really should just convert to Islam. It's the true way to be Jewish. And so if you're a Jew in Yemen, you're kind of getting a lot of pressure from a bunch of different sides to abandon Judaism, and it's very overwhelming, it's very scary. And I think he conveys that pain in his letter to the Rambam. And so then the Rambam writes this Igeret, this epistle to him, this letter responding. Now, we're not going to look at the whole thing. It's also a rather loftily worded translation. So, it takes someone to be able to wade through it properly. But this is what is talked about a lot when talking about the Rambam and Mashiach, because what he says stands in pretty stark contrast to what everything he has said in the Mishnah Torah. So examples of what he says. What does he tell this community that is suffering greatly and is like trying to figure out what to do, how to survive? They really need some guidance. They really need some help. So here are some excerpts. Oh good, this is loading. Excuse me, of his letter to them. I bolded the parts that are most important. But you can see here in the beginning, he says, my co-religionists, be strong and let your heart take courage. He spends a lot of time affirming them, saying, be strong, you're going to get through it. Like, I'm here with you. Remember all of these biblical verses. This is what's been talked about in the Torah, right? In Tanakh, but you're this, that, and that's the strength that you're going to get. You're going to get through it. So he becomes much more of a personable leader here, and he clearly is understanding their pain and trying to speak to it. So you can see here, there's a lot of biblical quotations using the Torah to say, God has mercy on you, everything is going to be okay. But then he goes in a very interesting direction. He says, all right, the future redeemer of our people is going to come from the stock of Solomon, son of David, right? That's not itself is so interesting. I mean, it's not so different. He's going to gather our nation, assemble our exiles, redeem us from our degradation, propagate the true religion, and exterminate his opponents, as is clearly stated in scripture. Then he says something that is not found in the Mishnah Torah. That's what I have here in bold. He will be sent by God at a time of great catastrophe and dire misfortune for Israel. As was predicted in the verse, there will be none remaining shut up or left at large. And when he appears, he will fulfill the promises made in his behalf. A later prophet too was alluding to the messianic tribulations when he declared, but who can endure the day of his coming? This is the proper understanding of this article of faith. So basically, what is he saying here? The first thing, Mashiach is going to come. Here's what he's going to do. And he's going to come dafka at a time when Jews are really suffering. And even, the word catastrophe, right? When things are really, 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 really bad. Next, from the prophecies of Daniel and Isaiah and the statement of our sages, it is clear that the advent of the Messiah will take place sometime subsequent to the universal expansion of the Roman Empire and Arabic rule, which is in actuality today. This fact is true beyond question or doubt. Daniel, in the latter part of his vision, alludes to the kingdom of the Arabs, to the rise of Muhammad, and then to the arrival of the Mashiach. Similarly, Isaiah intimated that the coming of the Messiah will occur after the rise of the madman, which is, in the verse, a man riding on a donkey, a man riding on a camel, and two men riding on horses. Now, the man riding on a donkey is a symbolic reference to the Messiah, as is evident from another verse which describes him as lowly and riding on a donkey. He will follow the man riding on the camel, that is, the Arabic kingdom. The statement, two men riding on horses, refers to both empires, the Roman and the Arabian. A similar interpretation of Daniel's vision concerning the image and the beasts is correct beyond doubt. They are conclusions derived from the plain meaning of the text. So we can get, kind of lost in a lot of the grandiosity of this language. But what's he saying? The Mashiach is riding a donkey, following the guy on the camel, right? That represents the Arabs. Following two guys on horses, that's the Romans. Romans and Christianity for these guys is basically the same thing. And also the Arabic kingdom, which means, when is Mashiach coming? If they're living, they've seen the surge of Christianity and now they're seeing the surge of Islam. Well, what's next? The Mashiach, right? That's what the Mashiach is riding in on that donkey, right in next to those things. We'll just keep going and then we'll talk about this as a whole.
So he's telling them to hang in there?
Uh-huh. And it's like, it kind of goes in shocking stages. Because here now he gets really crazier. I mean, crazy if you're talking about Rambam. So the precise date of the Messianic Advent cannot be known. And that's what he says in the Mishnah Torah, right? Don't bother trying to calculate it. But second sentence, but I am in possession of an extraordinary tradition which I received from my father, who in turn received it from his father, then goes through numerical calculations, Turns out that, I'll just go to the last line, according to the interpretation of this chronology, prophecy will be restored to Israel in the year 4970 after the creation of the world. So basically he says, now don't try to calculate Mashiach, but I've got this great tradition, from my father. And turns out the calculation is the year 4970, which corresponds to the Gregorian year of 1210. Mm. And he's writing this in, what year did I say it was? I just totally blanked on what year it was. It was 1172. 1172. So he's saying basically in less than 40 years, the world is going to be like totally redeemed. Now, I'm curious, if someone told you the world was going to be redeemed in 38 years, would you find that comforting?
Yes.
Okay. How would you find it comforting?
Well, because if I'm, either my children are going to see it, and depending on my age, I may get to see it.
Awesome. Anyone else want to agree or disagree?
Well, I would say that 40 years is a long time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, why would you think it's a long time?
I don't know if I would find comfort in that because it seems like a long time to me.
Okay.
Anyone else? In 40 years, I'd be like 82. I'm 41 now, so in 40 years, I'd be like 81 or 82. I'm not great at math, but I can do simple math like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. So yeah. What do you think? I'm interested to know your opinion. Do you think that's comforting or no? What do you think? I mean, I'm just wondering.
Well, I'm probably one of the youngest people here.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know. I'm 36, so I guess for me, 38 years is still possible. But certainly, I was listening this morning to the story of the heat waves in the the Northwest and thinking about that, and the world's closing in, and 38 years can be a long time or it can be a short time. It really depends on your perspective.
Where does it say that the world's going to be redeemed in 40 years? Where does it say that?
Well, he's saying that he has a tradition from his father, and from
who said that?
The Rambam, and then it's going to be the year 4970.
Okay.
Which happens to be 38 years afterwards. So it's a very interesting balance, especially in a world in which people did not live nearly as long as we are. Saying that it's coming and find comfort in that, but at the same time, it's not coming soon enough where you should like pack your bags. So I think it's I would imagine that's probably where the Rambam's comfort zone is somewhere between providing comfort, but also not tomorrow. Okay. Was someone going to say something?
I was gonna comment, I'm also among some of the younger people on this call probably, but if someone's, it's gonna be 30, 40 years, I would be like, okay, cool, what are you doing? Kind of flip it on its head, like, how are we gonna bring about Mashiach? But also just, living in the age of media and seeing all of these various religious sects throw out all of these dates and then seeing them like pass and nothing happens.
Yes.
I react with extreme skepticism
Yes.
that
Yes.
anything would change
Right.
at all.
I'm on team skeptic. I mean, I'm a big fan of Nostradamus, which will kind of give you, don't start being afraid of me, guys. Woo. But I sort of kept looking for the year 2012, I think, when the world was supposed to like come to an end, and it just kept chugging along, sort of thing. So I would not find comfort. I'd be skeptical. I won't live that long, but like you said, I would not be packing my bags.
Interesting. Harold, go ahead.
Yes. He has up until the last paragraph, he's sort of saying, well, it's impossible to know. And he sounds actually very credible. But then when he starts sort of saying, well, I have this little secret that nobody else knows about. It's this family tradition. And based on that, I can calculate precisely. And it's not 40 years, it's not 50 years, it's not 30 years, it's 38 years. It just, I don't know. It strikes me as losing a lot of credibility when you get that precise, particularly when you said it's unknowable, very convincingly.
Yeah. It's a big risk to say that.
It's, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think he probably knows that he's making a big risk by saying that.
When did the false Messiah come along, the one that Rabbi Akiva believes so strongly in
Bar Kokhba?
Yeah, when was that? When was his period of time?
Oh, in the year 130.
Okay.
Yeah, so well.
Who's Nostradamus?
Nostradamus had these visions.
Who was he?
He was, I think he was probably just a physician, as I recall.
Oh, doctor.
Yeah, but he'd have these visions of things that were going to be happening in the future, and he would end up writing them down, and he's got quartet after quartet after croton, I think it's called. Anyway, it's fascinating.
Was he Jewish?
No.
Oh.
Okay.
When did he,
Catholic.
when did he live?
I think around the 1600s.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Michael and Avril, Weissman's.
I think that maybe the Rambam might have been writing to give comfort to the Yemenites who were in terrible distress, and maybe he was trying to give hope. Yeah.
Yes.
But not really stating that he knew for sure. But that's I just thought I'd throw that in.
No, and that is absolutely the theory behind all of this. Monty, and then we'll talk about this. We'll talk about a little bit more. Oh.
Well, I don't find any comfort I have comfort in knowing that Mashiach is going to come at some point, but actually knowing a time frame makes me uncomfortable, because I don't know, just knowing all the things that we're going to have to go through, I'd rather just have some kind of, peace and quiet. And then, and if I'm around when Mashiach comes, great. If I'm not, great. But knowing that there's going to be tribulation and the world's going to be in upheaval, makes me have more anxiety.
Yes, that's a good way. Yeah.
Up the Lexapro, I want this to be comforting, just saying, know that the Messiah is going to come, period. That's
Totally.
That's enough for me.
Totally. And I
This
think
is
that's
like too much info.
right. And I think that that's where, you know, the very interesting breakdown between the epistle to Yemen and what he says in the Mishnah Torah emerges. The Mishnah Torah is written as a timeless text. You know, he thought it was going to speak to Jews forever, which, I mean, so far he's right. And what does he want? He wants people to believe in a rational world. He doesn't want people running around trying to calculate the end of days, trying to perform miracles, trying to, you know, the wolf and the lamb type of thing. This is not what he wants. He wants people to believe in the Mashiach, but at the same time, to think of it as something they have to wait for, right? That's the world the Rambam wants to construct. But the question is, what happens when he's actually faced with that really human side of this problem, which is a community that feels like the walls are closing in on them and that they're losing their Jewish identity, that there isn't a lot of hope for staying Jewish and for fighting for the future. And they're turning to him because they don't know who else to turn to. And when he doesn't have to look them in the face literally, right? But when he has to speak to them, you see this much more, I don't want to say that like saying that you can calculate the end of the world means you're more compassionate, right? I don't want to suggest that. But you see that part of him come out that says, I recognize why people do this. I recognize why people calculate the end of the world. I recognize why people believe in these things, even if I don't think that's the way to live. And it's like he indulges the part of himself that he disagrees with in order to bring them comfort in that moment, which is very, very interesting. Now, it's also interesting that the epistle to Yemen actually precedes the Mishnah Torah. So, you know, I'm not obviously an expert on the Rambam. I don't know if there's a theory that he did believe that originally and then radically changed his mind, or if this is just what he always believed and he struck a different tone in speaking with more empathy to this community. But I find that this is, you know, I find that this is just such an interesting exercise in when we can identify what is really going on with some communities sometimes when they're looking for Mashiach, right? As we've discussed, the role of Mashiach sometimes is that last straw that you can hang on to when it feels like everything in your current world is crashing in on you. And that there isn't going to be a solution, that it's going to be of this world, right? It has to be of another world. And what is that thing? Well, it's a Messiah, it's a savior sent to you from God. David, are you raising your hand anew?
I am.
Okay.
I am. So what is resonating with me about this is, and I'm arguing with myself, so give me a moment if you would.
Awesome.
That one of the things that I'm hearing from the Rambam is, on the one hand, it is about individual and communal ability to survive day to day, right? And it's existential in that sense. The other piece that is resonating with me is it's not about us, right? That is to say, you're here today, you may not be here tomorrow, but is it about you being there when the Mashiach comes, or is it about ensuring that the world is that there are things that are right with the world, so when Mashiach does come, which may be outside of the horizon for any individual or any community, it doesn't take away from what we need to do. And one of the things that resonates with me is one of the things that you mentioned a couple of weeks ago about Yochanan ben Zakkai, said it's nice, but keep doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. And the challenge, I think, for us as humans, myself included, is wrestling with that dissonance between what about me and what about my life and what can I really do and how altruistic, right, can I live my life understanding Mashiach will come. Mm. Altruistically, I should say. The adverb is not dead yet, but yes.
And more of a focus on altruism than on mitzvah observance. I mean, ritual mitzvah.
Yeah, and I wasn't even necessarily going to those as ways of living a life or living a Jewish life. I was, even staying away necessarily from the halachic observance there into the more philosophical understanding of our individual purpose within our lifetime versus our individual purpose within a much broader time horizon.
Got it. Understood.
I also have a question. So, why do we say Mashiach instead of Messiah? Why don't we just say Messiah instead of Mashiach?
Oh, it's just the English versus the Hebrew.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I kind of use them interchangeably.
So Messiah is Hebrew?
No, that's English. Mashiach is Hebrew.
Oh, Mashiach is Hebrew. Okay.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, so that's the Rambam, the internal inconsistencies, but he's not a flip-flopper. He just knows how to curate things to his audience. And as we said, he knows his own limits when speaking to people who are in distress. Now, so the Rambam, for all of his Rambamness and his articulation and all of that, I don't think he really creates much lasting impact in this field, certainly not as it is lived. Meaning it's not that he comes along with these ideas, codifies them, and never says, oh yeah, all that apocalyptic stuff that came before, the Rambam, we get it now, we're going to stick with him and we're going to move from there. And in fact, so that's not what happens. Apocalyptic messianism, by that I mean the notion that the world will be radically transformed, still remains very appealing and in many ways the more dominant perspective, especially because messianism at all is a popular topic amongst more Kabbalistic types, and that strain of thought does tend more towards the apocalyptic. So I just brought the Ramban, I know we just have a couple minutes left, I brought the Ramban as an example. He's living a little bit later than the Rambam, so he really just takes the opposite approach. So this is commenting on Vayikra in Parshat Bechukotai, when God says, part of when things get better is I will cause wild beasts to cease from the land. And he says, okay, in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who said that God will remove the animals altogether, our verse is according to its plain interpretation, that wild beasts will not come into your land. For by virtue of there being satiety from the abundance of goodness and the cities being full of people, beasts will not come into uninhabited areas. But in the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who said God will cause them to cease and that they will cause no harm, our verse is saying, I will cause the evilness of beasts to cease from their land. Okay, so basically what is he saying? He's saying that there's a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda says this pasuk means that there will still be wild beasts. They're not just going to enter your land. They're going to stay in their place and you will have your cities and they won't bother you. But Rabbi Shimon says, no. That's not what this means. This means that God is going to remove the evilness of beasts, right? Beasts are going to be fundamentally altered. Their very nature is going to be altered. Now, of course, these were actual real threats to them, right? In ways that we don't really think of them as threats to us the same way. But this is one of the major things that they were scared of, was beasts coming in. So he says, he's going to side with Rabbi Shimon, who says, no, that very nature of those animals is going to be removed. So he says, and that is a correct opinion, for at a time when the commandments are fulfilled, the land of Israel is as the world was in its beginning, before the sin of Adam, the first man, when no beast or creeping creature would kill a person, in accordance with what Chazal said, that it is not the serpent that kills, but sin that kills. So he says, okay, we like Rabbi Shimon, we're going to side with him, because that what it means is that we're going to go back to the time of the land of Israel before the sin of Adam. So this is a strain of thought within Messianism, that we're going to go back to the time of Eden before humankind sinned. He says, and that's what the pasuk means, that all these animals are going to lie down together. For the trait of praying came about in wild beasts only on account of the sin of Adam. For it was decreed upon him to be prey for their teeth. And praying became ingrained nature for beasts of prey, and they also began to prey on each other as well. Basically, animals only became predatory once Adam sinned. But until then, they weren't. And so you see my note. And until then, they weren't. And so things were much different then. And that is exactly what we are going to be returning to. He keeps going and says a similar stuff. So, and therefore, scripture states regarding the days of the Redeemer who will emerge from the stock of Jesse, that peace will return to the world, and the predatory, vicious nature of all beasts, animals, and creeping things will cease, as they were in their nature from the beginning. And the intent in the prophecy of Isaiah was about Chizkiyahu, whom the Holy One, blessed is God, sought to make Messiah, but the Israelites' merit did not suffice for that, so the fulfillment will be through the Messiah in a future time. It got close, but no cigar. We didn't quite get there, so it will happen in the future. But what's important here, and this is just an example of this type of thinking and the Ramban's thinking, is that the Rambam would say, you know, basically, it's just that those animals will still be there. They won't bother you, right? All the troubles of the world will just not be the focus. And the Ramban says, no, those troubles of the world, they're being undone. Those animals are going to stop being, you know, the world is only a vicious world because we sinned. And Mashiach means all that viciousness is just going to be undone. And we're going to go back to the way that we used to be, which is a radical transformation of nature. This is very much not Maimonidean. Okay, Chana, I saw you've been raising your hand.
Okay, I have thought of this pasuk like so much recently, in terms of the context when it talks about agricultural yield, if you follow laws and commandments, and invasive species. So I was speaking to a future neighbor of mine yesterday, and he was saying that every winter they shoot like 55 coyotes that are just running down the street, like ravaging people's animals and their chickens and whatever. And you know, there's been wild boar problems in the area. There's Japanese beetles that come down on the crops every year. So it's really like when you have one thing that's out of balance in the ecosystem, like all that overgrowth of the wild beasts comes down and wreaks havoc on the things that people are trying to work on. I think that, you know, it's this interpretation is so close. Like I wish all the rabbis had ecology classes, but it's just so fascinating to me to think of like, oh, the beasts are going to be returned to the way things were, and you know, it won't be like all of these crazy.
Right, coyotes are going to walk down the street and then come cuddle you and you know, pet your cat or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Thank you. Great comment, and you just made me a lot more wary of Ithaca.
It's not that bad. Don't have any livestock and you'll be okay.
Awesome. Bill, where'd you go? I just saw Bill with his hand up and then he disappeared. Okay. And so basically, so that's where I was gonna essentially conclude tonight, is just, like I said, this is kind of a transition class to round out the Rambam, who tried and certainly contributed to the field, but couldn't eliminate that human desire to believe in a more radical transformation of the world than the one that he articulated. So we we'll see. What I want to focus on from now on is not as much thought, but human movements around this. So please email me with any questions. It's been truly lovely to see all of you this evening. And I don't know.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye. Okay, of course. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you. Lila Tov, everybody.
Lila Tov.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. We can still have Hatikva, hope. you
Yeah,
know.
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, I
always
We
have a
hope.
can
question.
definitely talk about Zionism. Mhm.
When will be your next class? Your next Wednesday class?
When did we say? I don't remember what. If it's August 21st or no,
Okay.
that's not a date.
Is it always the fourth Wednesday of the month?
Ish, yes. Except for this month, I had to switch.
Okay.
Let me just check.
So next month it'll be the fourth Wednesday.
I have it on the 18th.
18th. Is that a Wednesday?
Yes.
Is that the third Wednesday?
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks.
Ben, I sent you a link for Nostradamus in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Greg.
You might just copy that before we sign off.
Oh yeah, sure. Thank
I
you.
see Bill's hand up. Bill, William.
Oh.
Yeah, I had a
Okay,
question.
you're there. Oh, hi.
It seems like one of the emphases on the wild beasts and their terror is ameliorated somewhat by vegetarianism. I'm wondering if there was any commentary on this verse or this idea of the Ramban in terms of vegetarianism.
Yes, definitely. It is connected to the Rav Kookiean idea that vegetarianism does represent a more moral ideal, that meat eating is a concession to the grim realities of human nature, basically was an antidote to murder and violence, but that it really is not the ideal way for humans to exist. So vegetarianism is definitely bound up in Messianism.
It's fascinating.
It's really interesting.
It's really interesting, really, which that last line, fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting today because I think that's, I don't want to, in some ways it's similar today, right? Veganism is part of like saving the planet, right? You're saving something. So it's.
But I had, because I'm a vegetarian, I had not made the connection between the act of killing animals is just a way to sort of lead off the fact that so we don't murder each other.
Yes, it's basically
fascinating.
This is your outlet for violence. Kind of, I mean, in some ways, I don't mean this flippantly. In some ways, I think that sports serve that function sometimes today for certain reasons.
Well, I'm going to violently attack a piece of carrot with my knife. And see
Just watch your fingers, please.
Slicing and dicing away.
It's very interesting that this just came up because I was having a conversation with my mom just the other day, and I said, especially living down here in Charlotte, where there's no kosher market. I mean, there's a kosher grocery store that has some frozen meat, but like getting kosher meat here is difficult. And I said, it's getting harder and harder, and it's so outrageously priced. I said, I think I'm just gonna, just for practical reasons, do vegetarian, because at home I eat dairy most of the time anyway. So it's just easier.
Yeah.
And so this really kind of gives me yet another reason that my decision is the correct one to go and eat more, to be a vegetarian.
It's a sign. Come on, Monty. Come
on
over
and
to the dark side.
Thing is,
come to the
there
dark
are
side.
several vegan restaurants and several vegetarian restaurants here. So, I mean, it's becoming easier and easier to be vegetarian.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
also, Beyond Meat and those sort of meat substitute products are getting better and better.
Oh yeah, they're great.
And when we moved here, we just never unpacked our meat dishes. And having I call it a single sex kitchen is amazing. Like you don't need
wow.
I can store my Pesach dishes in my kitchen. Like there's so much
room. Yeah, exactly. Just that alone makes life easier.
I asked April Rubin, I said, I want to be kosher. She said, you're a vegetarian, right? And I said, yeah. She goes, well, that kind of does it. So don't worry too much about it after that.
Helene, what's up?
Yeah, my rabbi in Newton, he's still there, Rabbi West Garden Schwartz. He said that I remember he gave a wonderful sermon on it. And I still keep in touch with him. Jeff Mendelson went to school with him, and he said resurrection. He gave a wonderful sermon on is a Jewish concept. And I always, it's maybe sometime if I find the sermon, I could send it to you.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for learning, teaching us, and we can learn with you. And it's so nice to learn with everyone.
It's so fun. This class is just fascinating.
And you
Helene,
create
what's
this
the name of the author?
atmosphere of openness and acceptance.
Yeah.
Helene,
Thank you.
what's the name of the author?
Which of Helene?
Yeah.
Say that again.
What's the name of the author?
The
You were talking about Rabbi West, what's his name? Garden
My
Schwartz?
Rabbi West Garden Schwartz of Temple Emmanuel in Newton, Massachusetts. And many years ago, he wrote a sermon on resurrection. And he's wonderful. You would love him, Ruth, and he'd love you. And he and Jeff Mendelson they went to school together. And he's a real down-to-earth person. A lot of humility. I know he's brilliant. That he's a lot of humility. He was a lawyer and he decided to become a rabbi. And his father-in-law is Arnold Goodman, who wrote a lot of things about burial practices. And I think he's still alive. And I've been blessed to have wonderful rabbis and Maharats. I think of you as a rabbi, Ruth. You're my teacher. And I've been very blessed to have wonderful rabbis. And so he's one of